Shalom, and welcome to V'ahavta Yisrael, a Hebrew phrase which means you shall love Israel. We hope you'll stay with us for the next 30 minutes as our teacher, Dr. Baruch, shares his expository teaching from the Bible. Dr. Baruch is the senior lecturer at the Zera Avraham Institute based in Israel. Although all courses are taught in Hebrew at the Institute, Dr. Baruch is pleased to share this weekly address in English. To find out more about our work in Israel, please visit us on the web at LoveIsrael.org. That's one word, LoveIsrael.org. Now, here's Baruch with today's lesson.
The Bible is most clear that if we're going to receive God's provision, if His anointing is going to be mighty upon us, then we need to be in the right location. And not only in the right location, but doing what we ought to do. Location is foundational for serving God. And in that same way, when we look at the marital relationship, we see that there are roles. There is a role for the husband, and there is a role for the wife. And it's only when they are in that right location are they able to properly fulfill the role that God has given to each. We ended last week our study with the Shulamite, the female, the woman, having a degree of insecurity. And she wanted to know where her beloved would be. She was trying to get to him. And by the way, when we look throughout the book of Song of Songs, foundationally what we see is that she is constantly wanting to arrive to him, to leave her present location and get to where he is. But there's a degree of uncertainty. Let me say that another way. There's a degree of doubt. And what does he do? He affirms his love for her, speaking so frequently as she is the best among the women. And therefore he says, if you don't know where I am, you can search, you can investigate. I don't have any problem with that. But in the end, I assure you that I will be in the right location where I ought to be and be doing the things I ought to be doing. And now we're ready for chapter 2. We're going to see her initial response to that and how she answers him in regard to his proclamation. Look with me to the book of Song of Songs and chapter 2. We read here, and it's the Shulamite, this woman who is speaking. And she says, I am the Rose of Sharon. Now, the area known as the Sharon has to do with an area that is most fitting for roses. And we have a unique word for rose. And in the next verse, we're going to come across another word, Shoshana, which is a more frequent word that is translated rose, but here in this book in English, it's frequently translated lily. But regardless, we're speaking about beautiful flowers. And when she says here in chapter 2 and verse 1, I am the Rose of Sharon, what is she saying? I am in the right location as well. Meaning that she's faithful to her role. She says, I am a Shoshana, another word for rose, or as I said, a lily of the valleys. Once more, it is very fitting, appropriate, the right location for this type of flower, Shoshana, is in the valleys, not in the mountains. So she is responding to him saying, I too am appropriate. I too am fitting. I'm in the right location. And they're both in the right location because they want to be faithful to their responsibilities. And this brings us to a very important question that each person within a marital covenant needs to answer. First and foremost, do I know the role that God has given to me, what I should be doing and what I ought not be doing in regard to this marital covenant? And secondly, do I know, am I functioning this way, and am I in the proper location? Being in that proper location, and sometimes that's a mindset. Having the right perspective is foundational in being a godly spouse. Doing what a husband ought to do, doing what a wife ought to do. Now look at verse 2. Here we find that he is responding to her statement. And he says, as a rose is among the thorns. And this speaks about opposition, but it also speaks about protection. Those thorns protect the rose, the beautiful blossom of a rose. It also shows a distinctiveness. There's a great difference between thorns and a rosebud. So he is saying here that she is a woman, that she is unique. And when he looks at, and we'll see this in a second, when he looks at other women, she is like the rose, and the rest are like thorns. So she stands out. And why does she stand out? Well, the context. Because she is a woman that is fitting, appropriate. She follows the role of a wife. She is in that right location. Look once more at verse 2. As a rose is among the thorns, thus is my spouse among the daughters. So he affirms how she stands out. That in his perspective, from his vantage point, she is unique. And it's very important for a man to convey that he sees his wife as unique, different, special, compared to all other women. And we've seen that he has done this not just once, but last week we saw when he says, you are a filly among Pharaoh's chariots. In this same way, he says how unique, how special she is. And then now verse 3, she responds and says, as an apple is among the trees of the forest. Most trees in a forest don't provide anything other than shade. But an apple tree among the forest, that is as well unique. It's special. It's a treat. It is a benefit. And what she is saying here is that he is a provider in his uniqueness. That he too is different, separated from the rest of the forest or the rest of men. Once more, as an apple is among the trees of the forest, thus is my beloved among the sons. So he says, let me tell you, you are unique among the daughters. And she responds, and you too are special, unique, different from the other men, the sons. So they both are affirming that they see something special. And this unique quality, in my opinion, comes from the fact that God has called you to be married to that individual. That it's a calling, that God has selected this one. And therefore, you need to recognize that only this one can fulfill God's purpose for you in this marital covenant. She continues and says, in his shadow, and the shadow means in his comfort. In his shadow I delight, and I will set. So she is taking delight, she is taking comfort in him and not in another. And this raises another serious pitfall for marriages. And that's when you begin to find some need being met, whether it's emotional or whether it's some other area of your life that someone else meets instead of your spouse. One of a sure formula is when one of that marital relationship, whether it's the man or the woman, they begin to find satisfaction in spending time with another individual of the opposite sex. And therefore, he or she begins to look forward to time with that person. They begin to share things, and it begins in their own mind very innocently. But when there's an emotional connection between a man and a woman, when they're not married, this emotional connection is wrong, and it's oftentimes going to be the foundation for a great failure. What is going to be extremely damaging to that marital covenant. So we need to guard ourselves from having that type of interaction and finding pleasure, satisfaction, our needs being met, comfort being experienced from another individual from an opposite gender. This is wrong. So she says, in his shadows I have delighted, and I will dwell. And his fruit is sweet to my cheek, and we might translate that to my mouth. She is affirming that this one satisfied, that this relationship is sweet. Now, does that mean that always a relationship is going to be sweet? No. But that relationship should be a source from time to time, as much as possible, for pleasure, delight. And we should cherish those times and proclaim that delight, that sweet connection we have with our spouse. We need to acknowledge it to them as she is doing. Verse 4. I have been brought to the house of love. Now, this is similar. If you go back to chapter 1 and verse 4, we see that she says, draw me away, meaning take me away from where I am. In other words, she's not satisfied in this location. And where is she? Well, the king has brought her, compelled her, forced her into his chamber. And she wants out. But in contrast to that, look now to verse 4 of chapter 2. It says, he has brought me to the house of wine. Wine, remember here, uniquely in the book of Song of Songs. Whereas outside the book of Song of Songs, usually wine is synonymous with joy, happiness. But here, there's an emphasis between wine and love. So he has compelled her, brought her to the house of wine, meaning love. And notice what she says, his banner. Now, the word here, degel, banner, is going to appear several times in different contexts for this book. And what it speaks of is victory or dominance. What she's saying is, he has brought me to submissiveness. How? By means, what does the text say? By love. Not forcing, not demanding, but she has been brought to submissiveness because of his great love that he has demonstrated. And when I say submissiveness, ladies, you can relax, because what that submissiveness is about is being a godly helpmate for your husband, assisting, helping him fulfill his call from God upon his life. And when you do that, you're both submitting to the Lord. And not only are you going to be drawn closer to him, meaning the Lord God Almighty, But by drawing closer to God, you are also going to be drawing closer to your spouse. When he demonstrates love and when she responds in a submissiveness to his love, there is going to be a great deal of satisfaction that comes from a heavenly provided intimacy that, let me say, most marriages sorely lack. Verse 5. Now we're talking once more about his provision, how he responds. It's a continuation. And notice what she says in verse 5. For he sustains me with, and normally that's probably a word for raisin cakes. We see that same word in regard to David in another context. But let me simply say this. We can understand it in our mind today as a dessert. So he sustains me with desserts. Now, one name in English for dessert is a sundae. And this simply reflected that Sunday was a day of non-work. Oftentimes in America, they confuse Sunday with the Shabbat. So it was a special day, and because it was a special day, people would treat themselves with an ice cream dessert called a sundae. So this term has to do with something that is taken of, partaken of, eaten in special occasions. But she says, he sustains me, meaning there's a degree of regularity to him providing that which is special in a frequent manner. So she writes, he sustains me with raisin cakes, and he pampers me. This is a word in modern Hebrew. It's a word for upholstery. So you have upholstery because if you didn't, that chair, that seat, might be very uncomfortable. It would be hard. It would grow displeasure or unpleasurable after a while. So you pad it. And she's saying here, using this same word, we'll translate it, pampers me with apples. And then look at the end of verse 5. Now, my wife and I, we were traveling, and I was getting ready to teach this at another location. And that's really the motivation for doing this special study on the book of Song of Songs. I taught a conference that centered on this, and I thought while it was still fresh, I would record it for our internet platforms. And what we find here, and what we were doing, was listening to it as we were driving from place to place. We would hear an audio reading of it. And let me say, the person who read this, although he had a wonderful voice, when he came to this, he says, "For I am sick of love." And the way he said it was so disheartening. But we've all heard the expression, "I'm homesick." Now, that does not mean I'm sick of home. Sometimes we may feel that way. But when someone says, "I'm homesick," it means that they long for home. They miss it. And that's what is being said here by the Shulamite. She is lovesick. She's not sick of love, but she longs for that experience. So once again, this lays a foundation for rightly interpreting this book, that she's not happy in her current situation. Where is she? Well, she is in the king's chamber. Everything else about her, and we'll see in the next chapter, she's in the city going about at night searching for him. But these are dreams. Remember, this is a song. It's like a play written down. It's something to tell a story. Solomon has written this with his great wisdom to speak about a confession. That you don't find the love of your life simply because you see a woman who's in a wonderful relationship and believe, if I take her, I'll have that same wonderful relationship. That's simply not how it works. So she says, end of verse 5, "For I am love sick." verse 6. Verse 6 gives us a very important principle in regard to intimacy. And I use intimacy in the broadest and in the greatest variety of intimacy. So it writes here in verse 6, his left hand is under my head. Now, this is a degree of support. So first and foremost, what does he do? If there's going to be intimacy, and here again, I mean this in, first of all, a heartfelt intimacy, a closeness, a deep affection. If there's going to be that, which is foundational for another definition or another expression of intimacy, it has to be there. So he thinks of his spouse first. He's not thinking of himself, but he supports her. His left hand is under my head, she says. And his right hand, that's with his right hand, he hugs her, it says. His right hand hugs me. Now, the right hand shows integrity. It shows an uprightness. So he is expressing two things. First and foremost, his understanding of her need to be supported, for him to make her feel secure, that he is putting her and her needs before his own. Very important. Secondly, as he draws her to him, it's done with integrity. It's not done with selfishness. It's not done with simply a desire that he has, but rather it's done with honesty, integrity. So his right hand embraces me or hugs me, draws me to. Verse 7. Verse 7, she charges. Now it's a word of, I charge you to take an oath, showing the seriousness. And showing what we'll see in verse 7 is how precious, and even though we know that love overcomes, love is able to deal with obstacles, that's what we're talking about, but realize love is very precious and it can be harmed very easily. When we're careless, when we're thoughtless, when we violate the principles of the marriage covenant, it can wound and damage that marriage and make it very hard to be repaired. So she says here, verse 7, I charge you, O daughters of Jerusalem. Daughters of Jerusalem, these are women of uprightness. She's counseling. And she's saying such a marriage and such a love is rare, and you need to see it as precious and take care, guard it. So she says, I charge you, daughters of Jerusalem, by the deers or the ibexes, and this is simply another type of deer of the field. Do not stir up, do not agitate this, and do not wake up love until it fulfills its desire. Now, what is she speaking of? Very simply, don't allow things to interfere with the formula, with the methodology, with the roles, and the biblical perspective that we should have in regard to a marital relationship. Guard your marriage. Don't let things affect it. And here's a biblical truth. The enemy is constantly, I want to say that again, the enemy is constantly, think of it this way, you have an enemy that will manifest himself, use different individuals, situations, thoughts that you have, whatever, all things, in order to attack this marriage covenant. Why? You should know the answer immediately. What is the purpose of a covenant, including a marriage covenant? To manifest glory to God. So you shouldn't say, well, is my marriage making me happy? Is my marriage meeting my needs? Is my marriage a source of my fulfillment? These are questions that godly people do not ask about their marriage. No, they ask, is our marital relationship a testimony that manifests the glory of God? Is God pleased with my marriage? Is He satisfied? Is it fulfilling what He has commanded a marital covenant to fulfill? This is what godly people ask. And I assure you of something. Having been married for 33 years, I can tell you that when that is your objective, these other things, they are indeed met marvelously by God. That your marriage will be a source of satisfaction. You will find that spouse, when you're both faithful to the marital roles, you will find that it will be a great source of joy. And you'll find satisfaction, contentment, and it will change you spiritually and make you into the person that Messiah died for you to be. So this is what she says, verse 8. In verse 8, she continues to speak and she says, the voice of my beloved, behold this one. And it's a term of pay attention to him. And she's saying this, if you pay attention to the language, it is a public proclamation. She's affirming something about him that he needs to hear. Now, remember I said, and someone might think, well, this is a sexist statement, Baruch, when you say women tend to be insecure. They are, but let me share with you this. Men tend to be insecure as well. Their insecurities may be in a different area, but humans by nature, male and female, although we can be very different, there's great similarities. So don't be upset, ladies, when I say women tend to be insecure. They are, you are. Likewise, men, you tend to be insecure. But the insecurities oftentimes manifest themselves differently. Why? Because men and women are very, 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 very different. How they see things, what they feel, if they're in a similar situation, how that situation makes them feel can be very, very different. How they process it, very, very different. And it's this difference that draws people together and fits and solidifies the two becoming one. It is purposeful. It is by design, divine design, that men and women are different. Notice what she says, verse 8. The voice of my beloved, behold this one. He comes skipping over the mountains and jumping over the hills. What is she saying publicly? Well, hills and mountains in this context relate to obstacles. And men, we need encouragement from our wives. It is devastating to a man when the woman testifies of her lack of confidence in him, that she doesn't believe that he will be successful, that he will accomplish something. It undermines this relationship, and it wounds him. So you need to be a source of encouragement. In the same way that a man needs to affirm his love for his wife, men need women to affirm that he is capable, that he is competent, that he will accomplish. And that's what she's doing here. She's saying, look at him. This is my beloved one. He's going to overcome these obstacles. He is going to skip over these difficulties, meaning he's going to handle them. And she's proclaiming that. And this is a source of great encouragement for him. Furthermore, she says, my beloved is like a deer, or most English Bibles, a young hart. I don't know what that is, but it's a ophir in Hebrew. It's a young powerful deer. Behold, this one stands behind the wall. Now, this wall is a wall of separation. And he's there, he stands on the other side. And he's looking through the window. He is gazing through the lattice. Meaning he's there and he's doing something. He's assessing the situation. How to overcome this separation that has occurred between him and her. And she's saying, I believe that you're going to solve this problem, that you are going to bring us back together. Verse 10. Now we see the man's response to her. And pay attention to what he says and how he affirms her. Verse 10. My beloved answered, and he said to me, rise up, you rise up, my spouse, my beautiful one, come. So he's saying, you respond, you come. He is making the preparations, he is taking the matter at hand for them to be reunited. There's an invitation to respond to his call to her. And once again, he affirms her, Yefati, my beautiful one. Verse 11. Verse 11, remember, this is a play. It's a song. And in literature, there is the concept of foreshadowing something. And we have a lot of that in this book called Song of Songs, where we, the reader, learn that the time is approaching for this reunification, this coming together, this separation to come to an end. And therefore he says, for behold, verse 11, for behold, the winter has passed, the rain is over, it has left. So what's happening? The winter time, a time of gloom, a time that's not comfortable, but one that's necessary. In Israel, a harsh winter means lots of wind and rain. But it is that wind and rain that is uncomfortable. We don't like it, but it produces a glorious spring. And spring, Aviv, is synonymous with, we know, in nature. This is when the animals are fruitful. They have their litters. They have their offspring. And this is what is being foreshadowed. That the time of spring of love and the manifestation of that love is going to be presented. So he says, the winter is over, the rains have passed and gone, and the flowers, they appear in the land. The time of singing has arrived, and the voice of the turtle dove can be heard in the land. So all of this is foreshadowing a change that is coming. There's going to happen a new reality. That common situation of problems and hardships and attack, they are going to come to an end, and there's going to be a new chapter of love. And that love is going to be stronger. It is going to be more prosperous because of what they have overcome. And let me pause for a moment and speak personally. But I can assure you that in a relationship, one of the things that makes my wife so attractive to me is the fact that we have been through things together. And it's that shared experience. See, we can be sitting someplace, we travel a lot, we can be waiting in an airport and be having something to drink, and we begin to talk. And normally we talk about this and that, but eventually we begin to speak about something that has more significance. And we'll make mention, we'll be reminded of something that has happened. Maybe something that is very hard, something that was needed to overcome a problem, or perhaps something that was of great pleasure and joy, something that we remember about our children when they were younger. And here's the truth. I can never have that connection with another woman based upon these experiences because Rivka is the only one I shared these intimate times, these special moments, these life experiences with children and life in general, only with her. And so because of that, I have a connection with her that I could never have with anyone else. And the longer that history grows, the deeper that connection becomes. And it's that connection that binds us together and is so special. And this is what we're seeing here. It's a time of new beginnings, this renewal, because they've passed through something. This is what's being foreshadowed. They passed through something together. Goes on in verse 13. And the fig tree sends forth her figs, and the vines the tender grapes. They give their fragrance. Arise, come, my spouse, my beautiful one, you come. So once more he's saying, the season is at hand. You respond to what he's going to make a reality. And it foreshadows this reunion that we're going to see at the end of our study of this book. Verse 14. Here we're finding that he continues to speak and says, my dove in the cleft of the rocks, in the hidden stairs, show me your appearance. Let me hear your voice. And again, he's speaking to her. For your voice is pleasant, and your appearance is comely. And it's comely in the sense as a oasis is, as in a desert. So this word comely or appropriate or whatever you translate it, it's the word, I believe, nava. We'll look at it and make sure I say it right. Nave. It's very common in neighborhoods. There'll be nave, whatever, the oasis of. So nave, an oasis. So he's saying you are unique among everything else. You are special. You're like that oasis in the desert. Verse 15. Now, some would argue, and I remember when we were dealing with this, some would say the brothers are speaking. We don't know that. But in this, we have different choruses, different people that are proclaiming something. And here it seems to be a response. And it says, verse 15, seize for us the foxes. Foxes are a threat. They bring destruction. And it said here, seize for us the foxes, the little foxes, the small things, the things that we may think are insignificant. It says they are the ones that destroy the vineyards. By the way, I'm looking at this word in Hebrew, and it's the word for, in modern Hebrew, for terrorist. So a terrorist brings about destruction. So it's the little foxes, the small things, and that's why we have to guard against everything. Because Satan, what he does is that Satan wants to just get a little foothold in your relationship. And if he can get that little foothold and we say, well, that's nothing, that's insignificant, that's not a big deal. But he will grow that into something that can be devastating. And that's why you say, you know what? I had this work associate. Yes, he's a male, I'm a female. But what's the problem if we're working together that take some coffee together. Maybe we want to stretch our legs, we go for a walk. It's innocent. It doesn't mean anything. We're just stretching our legs together. And what happens is this, is that you begin to do one thing and another. It leads to something more, and before you know it, disaster. And I've heard over and over and over people go, I didn't plan for this. It wasn't expected. I never thought it would happen. Well, when you violate these little steps along the way and you embrace them, it's going to lead to something that is disastrous. So it's these little innocent foxes that turn into big foxes that bring destruction. It says it's the little foxes that destroy. Your Bible may say spoil. It's a much, much harder word than that. In fact, the place that I know that it appears, the same word in modern Hebrew, in the Hebrew translation of the New Covenant, is when there are angels sent out to destroy, not spoil the world, a little spoil here. No, it's a destructive word. So it's the little foxes that destroy the vineyards. And our vineyards are what? Our vineyards are tender grapes, meaning they need great care and protection. Verse 16. My beloved is to me, and I am to him. Now, she is speaking here, and notice something. My beloved is to me, and I am to him. You know what that does, people? And I see, and my wife has one, a little necklace written in Hebrew, where it says the same expression, Dodi li ve'ani le Dodi. Well, what we see is this. It shows the leadership of the man. She says here, read it very carefully, my beloved is for me or to me. First and foremost, he's to her. Then she says, and I am for him. But it shows leadership and how important it is for the man to convey his love for her first. It says that he is a shepherd among the roses. Or he shepherds his flock among the roses, meaning that he takes his sheep to the best places, the places that they truly like. Verse 17. Until the day passes. Literally, it's a word for blowing. The day blows by. Until the day blows by and the shadows flee. It says, my beloved, turn, and you be like a deer, or a young hart, that is that young, powerful deer, where? Above the mountains of Batar. Batar, we can understand that in modern Hebrew, the mountains around Jerusalem. You want to get to Jerusalem, you have to overcome these mountains. But the word Batar in Hebrew is a word for separation. So once more, if we didn't get what we should have when she said earlier that her beloved is skipping over the mountains and jumping over the hills, well, we should understand that he is going to overcome. She believes this, that he is going to overcome the mountains, not a mountain of, but the mountains of separation. There are numerous things that have to be dealt with in order for this separation to come to an end. Well, we're going to close with that, and we're going to continue next week in chapter 3 of the book of Song of Songs, where there's this great vision, a dream, that is introduced into this wonderful song, this play, in teaching us how to build a godly marriage, a marriage covenant that does indeed manifest glory to God. Until then, may God richly bless you. Shalom from Israel.
Well, we hope you will benefit from today's message and share it with others. Please plan to join us each week at this time and on this channel for our broadcast of LoveIsrael.org. Again, to find out more about us, please visit our website, LoveIsrael.org. There you will find articles and numerous other lectures by Baruch. These teachings are in video form. You may download them or watch them in streaming video. Until next week, may the Lord bless you in our Messiah Yeshua, that is, Jesus, as you walk with Him. Shalom from Israel.